Yeah, absolutely. I literally had the X-ray results in about 2 days ago.
Really?
Yeah, because I've still got this rod in my back, and I've got like
What?
screws.
The year was 2020, and Simon Cowell was lying completely still in a hospital bed, unable to feel his legs. Just hours before, he had been at his Malibu home riding his electric bike in the California sun. One wrong turn, one split second of lost control, and then silence. He had shattered his spine in 3 places. The man who had spent 2 decades sitting in judgment of the world, arms crossed, voice cutting, able to end a dream with 4 words, was now flat on his back, unable to get himself off a hospital mattress without help. Nurses prepared him for emergency surgery. His fiancée, Lauren Silverman, sat outside the operating theater, hands clasped, terrified. His little boy, Eric, just 6 years old, couldn't understand why Daddy wasn't coming home that night. And somewhere between the anesthesia and the operating table, something inside Simon Cowell cracked wide open. Not just his spine, something much deeper than that. Because this wasn't the story of a man who fell off a bicycle. This was the story of a man who had been falling for years and never told a soul. To truly understand what happened in that hospital room, you need to go back to the beginning. Back to a boy from Brighton who had absolutely no reason to believe he would one day control the entertainment industry. Simon Cowell was born in 1959. His father worked in property. His mother had been a ballet dancer. From the very start, Simon carried 2 things everywhere he went: an obsessive eye for what people wanted and a terror of ending up as nothing. He dropped out of school at 16, tried to build something on his own, failed, then failed again. At one point, the man who would one day be worth hundreds of millions of pounds had to move back into his parents' home as a grown adult. He has called it one of the most humiliating moments of his life. But Simon Cowell was never the kind of man who stayed down for long. He clawed his way into the music industry, starting from mailroom jobs, learning every angle, studying what made ordinary people stop and pay attention. By the late 1990s, he had a reputation that made record executives nervous. He didn't care about art. He didn't care about critical acclaim. He cared about what the person sitting on a sofa on a Tuesday night actually wanted to feel. And then came Pop Idol, then American Idol, then The X Factor, then Britain's Got Talent. Practically overnight, Simon Cowell became one of the most recognized faces on the planet. The sharp comments, the slow, devastating pauses before a verdict. The raised eyebrow that told a contestant everything before his mouth even opened. The world saw a man made of stone, confident, in complete control. But no one expected what was happening behind that image. No one expected what that kind of life was quietly doing to him. For years, Simon lived inside the machine he had built. Surrounded by power, money, famous faces, and deals being made at every hour of the day. He was the gatekeeper of pop culture, and he knew it. But underneath the empire, the cracks were forming. People who worked closely with him noticed the signs first. The obsession with control that never switched off. The impossible standards he held everyone to because he held himself to those exact same standards, without mercy, without rest. The working hours that bled into sleepless nights. The diet of cigarettes and black coffee and barely enough food to sustain a person. At his lowest point, he admitted publicly that he was eating almost nothing. That his body was running on pure stress, pure adrenaline, and very little else. His appearance became something he protected with fierce obsession. He was photographed looking gaunt. Then looking different, then unmistakably altered in ways the tabloids didn't waste time being polite about. The internet had opinions. The headlines were cruel. And the man who had built his entire career on delivering brutal honesty now found himself sitting in the crosshairs of it. But he kept going. Because stopping was something Simon Cowell had never learned to do. And that's when everything started to fall apart from the inside. The August 2020 accident was far more serious than the initial headlines suggested. Simon hadn't simply fallen off a bike. 3 vertebrae in his spine were fractured. Surgeons operated for hours, inserting a metal rod into his back just to hold him together. In the weeks that followed, he could barely walk. The pain was something painkillers could only touch the surface of. For a man who had controlled every single room he walked into for 20 years, this was something he had absolutely no power over. And that's where the story takes a turn nobody saw coming. Because Simon Cowell, the man who had spent his entire career hiding behind a carefully constructed wall of sharpness and control, suddenly had nowhere left to hide. Lying in that hospital bed, With surgeries behind him and months of grueling recovery ahead, something inside him finally surfaced. He began speaking to his son differently. Looking at Lauren differently, looking at himself differently. And when the doctors sat down and told him the truth about his body, it was more shocking than anything that had appeared in any tabloid about him. His bones, they told him, were weaker than they should have been for a man his age. The lifestyle he had been living for years, the chronic stress, the poor diet, the supplements taken in place of actual nutrition, the sleep deprivation had been silently deteriorating his body from within. The bike hadn't broken him, his body had already been breaking. The bike had simply made it impossible to pretend otherwise. Recovery was brutal in ways Simon had never experienced before. The man who had sat in judgment of thousands of other people now had to sit in judgment of himself. And what he found when he finally stopped running was uncomfortable. He had spent years getting the priorities completely wrong. He had chased deals instead of memories. He had let his public image consume the space where a real life should have been. He had missed quiet moments with Eric. He had asked Lauren to wait on a future he kept delaying for no reason that held up to honest examination. And when the accident forced him to be still, all of it came rushing in at once. He began opening up in interviews in ways that left even longtime observers caught off guard. He talked about becoming a father at 54 as something that had fundamentally rearranged him. About sitting at the edge of a swimming pool watching his small son learn to kick and paddle and feeling something he couldn't put words to. About crying at a school event quietly in the back row. Simon Cowell, in the back row, crying. Nobody who had watched him dismiss contestants without a flicker of emotion was expecting that, and then came the engagement announcement. The man who had spent years on record saying he would never marry, who had turned the question into a deflection he used in almost every interview, who had let the world believe that commitment on that level simply wasn't something he was built for. He had decided quietly, privately, that Lauren was the reason to become someone different. No publicity stunt, no orchestrated reveal, just a decision, a real one. But even as Simon rebuilt something genuine in his personal life, the world outside was not waiting. Television had changed beneath him while he was recovering. Streaming had pulled audiences away from traditional formats faster than anyone in the industry had predicted. The era of the primetime talent show, the era Simon Cowell had essentially invented and then dominated for 2 decades, was no longer the unstoppable force it once had been. The X Factor had been quietly shelved. American Idol had found ways to survive without him. Even Britain's Got Talent continued, but the cultural conversation had moved somewhere else entirely. Simon could feel it, and rather than resist it, he did something that surprised almost everyone who thought they understood him. He adapted. He changed his diet completely. Lost a significant amount of weight. Let go of habits and dependencies that had followed him for years. People who crossed paths with him said he seemed different not just in how he looked, but in how he carried himself. But the question being whispered in every meeting room and every industry lunch was the same. Could Simon Cowell reinvent himself the way he had reinvented everyone else? Because here was the cruel irony at the heart of everything. The man who had made his entire fortune, his entire identity, on telling other people they weren't quite good enough, was now sitting quietly with that same question pointed directly back at himself. Today, Simon Cowell is 66 years old. He is engaged to the woman who never left his side through any of it. Their son Eric is growing up with a father who is visibly, genuinely present in a way Simon himself has admitted he never expected to be capable of. He is still demanding. Still the sharpest voice in whatever room he occupies, but there is something different underneath it now. Something that wasn't there before the accident, before the surgery, before all of it came crashing down on a quiet afternoon in Malibu. The fall that broke his back may have been the thing that finally, after 66 years, taught Simon Cowell how to stand up for something real. And maybe that is the most fitting thing of all. That the man who never let anyone see him struggle had to lose everything just for a moment before he could truly understand what he had. So now I want to hear from you. Do you think the accident genuinely changed Simon Cowell, or is the real Simon always going to be the man in that big chair? Drop your thoughts in the comments. I read every single one. And if you want more stories like this, the real ones, the ones that go deeper than the headlines, subscribe and turn on notifications. Because the next story we're covering, you are absolutely not going to want to miss it.